Hook and by Crow. The Gamble. Shakuni was the prince of Gandhara. Gandhari was his sister. Thus, Shakuni was Duryodhana's maternal uncle and was his constant companion in Hastinapur. Shakuni was fully aware of Pandava's might and also knew of Duryodhana's intense hatred towards them. The evil-minded Shakuni nurtured this hatred and advised Duryodhana to destroy the Pandava brothers after the incident at Indraprastha. Shakuni went to the forlorn Duryodhana and told him, "My dear nephew, I know a way to drive the Pandavas out of Indraprastha without any fight and without shedding any blood." Duryodhana's eyes lighted up in hope. He asked, "Uncle, how is it possible?" Shakuni replied, "Yudhishthira is very fond of the game of dice. You invite him for a game. I will play on your behalf. I will trick him into defeat and thus win his kingdom and his wealth for you. Do you like my plan?" Would not Duryodhana be delighted at such an opportunity? But before sending a word to the Pandavas, Duryodhana and Shakuni went to Dhritarashtra and explained their plan of inviting Yudhishthira for a game of dice and defeating him totally and taking away all his wealth and kingdom away from him. Dhritarashtra at first did not favor the plan, but when Duryodhana insisted on this, Dhritarashtra, out of his blind love for his son, and relented. Ultimately, he summoned Vidura to invite Yudhishthira for the game of dice. Yudhishthira had vowed that as an emperor he would never indulge in such game, but since his elderly uncle had summoned him, he went to Hastinapur along with his brothers and the royal retinue. Duryodhana had a magnificent hall specially erected for the game. Many distinguished persons of the Kuru clan, royal teachers and officials were present in the hall on the day of the game, and a huge platform had been erected. Shakuni invited Yudhishthira to start the game. Upon Yudhishthira asked Duryodhana as to play who would play with him, replied that his uncle Shakuni would cast the dice instead of him. Yudhishthira was confident of defeating Duryodhana in a game of dice, but felt diffident against Shakuni as Shakuni was an expert player. So he hesitated and said, "How could Shakuni play on your behalf when it is you who have invited me to this game?" Duryodhana, looking deranged, asked, Well, are you afraid of losing to my uncle?" Yudhishthira flashed with embarrassment and said, "Duryodhana, I am not a coward. I shall play." The hall was full and everybody knew that the game would end in a better way, but they could do nothing about it. At first, gold, silver and ornaments were wagered, and Yudhishthira lost them in no time. One by one he pledged his servants, his chariots, horses, armies, and lost them too. The fervent plea made by his brothers to stop the game did not have any effect on Yudhishthira. When he had nothing more to pledge, he staked Sahadev and Nakul, and Shakuni's cunning game made him lose them too. Shakuni taunted him by saying, "Yudhishthira, after all, they are your step-brothers, and that is why you could stake them. I bet you won't not dare offer Bhima and Arjuna a stake." Yudhishthira by that time was feeling thoroughly reckless and stung by Shakuni's retort, continued the game by offering the ever-victorious Aspergers. He lost them too. Shakuni then reminded Yudhishthira about Draupadi and said, "There is a very valuable jewel in your possession. I call upon you to continue the game with your wife, Draupadi, as wager." The desperate Yudhishthira pledged her to and lost her. Shakuni stood up and shouted that he had won the Pandavas and Draupadi, and they had to become his slave. The entire gathering was stunned. Some wept with distress. Some blamed Duryodhana for the situation. Bhishma and Drona and Krupa were worried about the consequences. Duryodhana roared like a lion. "Draupadi will henceforth be our maid. She is at our command." He turned towards Vidura and said, "Vidura, go and fetch her." Vidura exclaimed, "Have you become insane? You are heading towards your own destruction." He ignored Vidura's caution and sent a charioteer to fetch Draupadi. He was intent on humiliating Draupadi in full view of gathering. Draupadi refused to go to the court of Duryodhana and said, "How could a man stake his wife after he himself had lost the game? When I do not belong to him, how could he have the right to pledge me as a pawn? I refuse to come." Duryodhana was engaged on hearing this answer. "How dare the maid talk back like this? Dushashana, my brother, bring that maid here." even if you have to drag her by the hair. This is my order. Dushasana was big. He went quickly to Draupadi's chamber and cocked her by long hair, black hair, and dragged her to the assembly. Draupadi was extremely angry. She argued that she could not be taken as a pawn, as Yudhishthira had lost his freedom to stake her much earlier. She appealed to the elders like Bhishma, Drona, Krishna, and Dhritarashtra not to allow such a misdeed. Duryodhana had exceeded the limits to decency, totally ignoring what was right and what was wrong, and also ignoring that the assembly consisted of male members and the elders. Duryodhana instructed Dushasana to seize Draupadi's garments and disrobe her. The gathering was aghast. How could anybody tolerate a lady being thus insulted? Even Dhritarashtra had not anticipated that the matter would be carried out so far. He begged of his son, "Oh, my dear son, do not resort to such acts and bring dispute to the Kaurava clan." Bhishma and Drona were fully of grief that they had to witness such scene. But Duryodhana was adamant. He ordered his brother to pull out Draupadi's story. The helpless Draupadi trembled with fear like a poor fawn stricken by a tiger. None among the gathering could protect her. Her 5% who were described as the mighty ones were now Kila.
Gimana cu? Kalau cu?
The helpless Draupadi, 5% who were described as mighty ones, were now Kaurava slaves. At that moment, she could only think of divine intervene and prayed to Lord Krishna to come to her help. As Dushasana tried to disrobe Draupadi, another garment would appear on her, and soon a heap of garments were piled up in the assembly. Dushasana pulled her garments, and there seemed to be no end to them. He was so tired that he had to give up. While the assembly watched this miracle, the frustrated Duryodhana walked out of the assembly. Draupadi slowly opened her eyes, and the Pandavas stood in one corner, bowing their heads in shame. It was Bhima who broke the deathly silence. He swore, "Sooner or later I shall rend the breast and drink the blood of." He swore, "Sooner or later I shall rend the breast and drink the blood of Dushasana." Draupadi also swore that till Dushasana was killed, she would not tie up her hair. Nature also seemed to protest against such a shameful act. Suddenly the earth seemed to quiver. There were several evil omens. Rain also poured out of his fury. Dhritarashtra called Draupadi to his side and attempted to soothe her by saying, "Child, my son has erred. Whatever you want, I will grant to you as an atonement for his mistake." Draupadi, a devout wife, wanted her husband to be freed from bondage. She also asked for return of the weapons. Dhritarashtra was even prepared to back himself to them, but self-respect would not make Draupadi to accept their kingdom from her enemies. She refused this offer. The Pandavas left the curse hall, and stunned by the turn of events, Draupadi followed them. Duryodhana was extremely angry when he heard that his blind father had returned all the weapons to the Pandavas and freed them from bondage. He showed his anger on his father. The poor Dhritarashtra did not even have the courage to stop his son shouting. Finally, Duryodhana pressurized Dhritarashtra to call Yudhishthira once again for the game of dice, and that whoever was the loser was to go on exile to the forest for 12 years and spend the 13th year incognito. If they were to be recognized in the 13th year, they were go into the exile 12 years. Exile 12 years. स्टोरी
इतना तो बेवकूफ नहीं हूँ मैं।
क्या
बता रही हूँ, इतना तो बेवकूफ नहीं हूँ मैं।
तुम्हें जाना जैसे कोई कुंटा।
ओए क्या
पढ़े लिखे तो हो नहीं।
पढ़ते तो
आप समझते हो। ये मम्मी तो पढ़े लिखे नहीं है, पर उतना बेवकूफ नहीं हूँ मैं।
तुम्ही तो सब जानो कौन बेटा
हाँ,
अरे यार डिस्टर्ब करा नहीं, पढ़ते जाओ,
सो तो गई थी
पढ़ते जाओ।
ना, उतना बेवकूफ तो नहीं हूँ गौतम।
समझता है मम्मी
गौतम
हाँ
क्या हुआ?
पढ़ रहा हूँ यार, जाओ
पढ़
ना।
नहीं रहा तू
ओए, पढ़ रहा हूँ जाओ।
झूठे
मैं देखो ये तू तो गेम खेल रहा ना गो माँ।
गौतम
अरे पढ़ी टी यार, डिस्टर्ब करो नहीं, आधा घंटा रे আমার कंप्लीट होइबे। डिस्टर्बिंग एलिमेंट्स।
चुप खुद होता है डिस्टर्ब और
कॉलेज की पढ़ाई तो चलती रहेगी, उसके चक्कर में एक
वो चलती रहेगी
ये तो 10 साल में भी खत्म नहीं होगी अगर ऐसे सोचेंगे तो। इतने सालों से किताब पढ़ी थी मेरे पास, कभी नहीं पढ़ा मैंने। Duryodhan was extremely angry when he heard that his blind father yes. The elder tried their level best to make Duryodhan come to his senses and not to bring any more misfortune to Pandavas. How could Duryodhan agree when he did not want them alive? His sole intention was to banish them forever. Yudhishthira too could not resist the temptation of playing the game and win back what he had lost. So he returned to Hastinapur and said again for the game of dice. Needless to say, Yudhishthira lost again and had to leave for the forest. When they set out for the forest, the citizens of Hastinapur requested them not to go. Their grief and lamentation filled the sky. When Dhritarashtra learned about their departure, he was filled with even more fear and anxiety. But Duryodhana was not moved. Bhishma and Drona could not even utter a word because they were under obligation of Dhritarashtra. When Krishna came to know of the incident, he went to Hastinapur and had fetched his sister Subhadra, who was Arjuna's wife, and her young son Abhimanyu to Dwarka. When Draupadi's brother Dhrishtadyumna heard of Draupadi's humiliation, he vowed to take revenge against Kauravas. Kunti stayed with Vidura. The Excel हो गया। Excel कितने चैप्टर्स हो गए?
I'm really sorry.
Okay.
I'm really sorry.
The Excel. Now we have completed the wax mention, Draupadi Swayamvar, Raja Suya Yagna, the gamble. And now it's the Excel also is there. So we can complete this one also. So the Excel. To be in exile in a forest is a very tough experience because the forest is full of wild animals. It is an area where Rakshas roam about freely. Mostly it is dark in the forest. One has to go in search of water and live on tubers and fruits. The Pandavas, who had always lived in a royal style, had to face all such hardships in the forest, but their courage and their righteousness never failed them. Yudhishthira, along with his brothers and wife, lived in a forest called Kamyaka. Not many people lived there. Only a few sages could be found, and living in a forest was really, really tough. All such hardships constantly reminded them about Duryodhana's treachery. They could never forget that their hard-earned kingdom was lost to Duryodhana in a deceitful game, and neither could they forgive him for his treatment towards Draupadi. So they always sought ways and means to get back their kingdom. Within a short time, the Pandavas moved on to another forest. Meanwhile, Yudhishthira felt that the only way they could back their kingdom was to wage a war with Duryodhana. For this purpose, they had to secure necessary weapons and collect an army, for which they had to contact kings friendly to them. Wicked people always remain wicked. They take greater delight in harassing good people. Duryodhana, after banishing the Pandavas, was afraid that they would reclaim their kingdom once their exile was over. This is why he wanted to have them killed during the exile itself. Hence he counseled with Shakuni and Karna, who were close to him, and said Pandavas should now be weak. Without proper food and without proper weapons, it would be so easy to defeat them. Now Shakuni and Karna agreed that it would be so. but they needed the permission of the elders to put this plan into action. So Duryodhana thought of an idea. Under the pretext of counting the cattle head, he invaded various woods and forests. When he entered the forest where Pandavas had sought refuge, Chitrasena, a Gandhara king, under instructions from Indra, waylaid Duryodhana and his army and defeated him. Shakuni and Karna fled from the place with Chitrasena and dragged Duryodhana to Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira was very righteous man. He always looked upon Duryodhana as one of his brothers. So he ordered Duryodhana's release. Feeling insulted at his failure, Duryodhana returned to Hastinapur and nursing his wounds and waiting for the right time to avenge defeat on the Pandavas. During their exile in the forest, the Pandavas met several sages and always sought the righteous path from them. While in exile, Bhima met his elder brother Hanuman. Acha. Arjun observed penance in the Himalayas and pleased with him. Ishwar, Yama, Kubera, Varuna and others granted him several very powerful weapons. Arjuna also learned dance and music from Chitrasena. The exile period of the Pandavas was drawing to a close, and one day a Brahmin came to running to Yudhishthira and requested him to get him back the deer skin, which had got strangled in deer's horn. The Pandavas went in search of the deer, but found it difficult to catch it. They were feeling thirsty after the chase, and hence Yudhishthira asked his younger brother Sahadev to fetch water from any nearby lake. Sahadev did not return even after a long time. The worried Yudhishthira sent Nakul after him. Nakul did not run. Then he sent Bhima, but he too did not return. Arjun also followed suit. So Yudhishthira himself went in search of his brother. After walking through a long distance, he saw crystal clear lake. Lotus flowers had bloomed beautifully in the lake and presented a delightful scene. So he thought that his brothers would be somewhere around admiring the scenery. But when he looked around, he was shocked to see his very dear brothers dead by the banks of the lake. Yudhishthira could not believe his own eyes. How could this have happened? He wondered. Tears welled in his eyes at the thought that all his brothers were no longer alive. Actually, when the brothers went one by one to fetch water from the lake, and Yaksh has laid a condition that they could not fetch water till they could answer to his question, but the thirsty brothers ignored him and drank the water and fell unconscious. Yudhishthira was not aware of this. He too could not contain his thirst. When he approached the lake to drink water, he heard an oracle. It belongs to this Yaksh. Answer my question before drinking water, said the voice. Without losing his cool, Yudhishthira replied, You can ask me anything you want. I will answer to them the best of my ability. Which has the fastest speed? Speed of the mind. What is superior to earth? Mother. What gives happiness to man? To give up anger. How can one be the richest? By giving up desire. What causes man discussion? His haughtiness. What weapon do you need to face danger? Bravery. The Yaksh had many more such questions to ask, and when Yudhishthira answered them promptly, he was highly pleased. I can make one of your brothers alive, but who should it be? But who should it be? Said Yaksh. Yudhishthira loved all his brothers equally, but without hesitating he said, My brother Nakul. Yaksha was surprised. Instead of Bhima or Arjun, why do you ask Nakul's life? Yudhishthira said in a calm voice, Sir, I agree that Bhima and Arjuna are my brothers. Nakul is my stepbrother, Madri's son. I cannot sacrifice him for the sake of my own brothers. Appreciating Yudhishthira's attitude, Yaksh brought back Nakul to life. I will put back life to another brother of yours. Who should it be? Yes, Yudhishthira asked for Sahadev. As soon as he said, astonished by the Yaksh said, Yudhishthira, at least now you could have asked for one of your valiant brothers. Yudhishthira had an apt reply. Sir, when my father died, my mother Madri also gave up her life, but she ordered me to look after Nakul and Sahadev as my own children. How could I fail her? Extremely pleased with Yudhishthira, the Yaksha brought back Bhima and Arjun back to life and blessed all of them well. The Yaksha was none other than Yama, father of Yudhishthira. He blessed his own son by saying, Your exile ends now. One more year in incognito and your hardship will be covered. So you go to Matsya kingdom and live there in disguise under King Virata. The Pandavas, along with Draupadi, began their journey to Matsya kingdom. The slaying of Kichak. I think I've read too many chapters today. Okay, no matter. We will read it. Okay, so as per the condition laid down during the wager, the Pandavas completed 12 years of exile in the forest. They now had to live incognito for 1 year. During the year, if their true identity was to be found out, they were to spend another 12 years in exile. Okay, the Pandavas followed the Yaksha instructions and entered the city of Matsya in disguise. Prior to that, they wrapped all their weapons in a gunny bag and hung it to a branch of a tree in a crematorium which was outside the city. Yudhishthira secured the friendship of King and Virata under the name of Kankabhata. Bhima was employed as a cook in the royal kitchen and was known as Valala. Arjun, who had learned the art of dance and music under Chitrasena, called himself as Brihanala, and dressing up like a woman taught these arts to the king's children. Sahadev obtained employment in the cowshed and Nakul in the stable. Draupadi worked as a maid to the queen under the name of Sairendri. It grieved Yudhishthira that all of them had to be menial tasks, especially Draupadi. The queen had a brother called Kichak. He was the commander-in-chief of Virata and wielded a lot of power and influence. Once Kichak went to the queen's chamber to meet his sister and saw Draupadi there. Draupadi was extremely beautiful and Kichak was so smitten by her beauty that he talked indecently to her. Scared of his insistence, Draupadi escaped from his clutches and fled to her own room. Kichak, who had great influence over his sister, went to her and told her about his passion for the maid. Dear brother, Sudeshna, the queen advised him, do not force any woman into submission. Give up your desire for her. But Kichak would not listen. He persuaded his sister by saying, after all, she is just a maid. Make her come to my chamber. Out of her love for her brother, the queen decided upon a plan. That evening, Sudeshna summoned Draupadi and instructed her to carry a jug of intoxicating drink to Kichaka. Draupadi hesitated, but she had to follow the queen's order. She went to the royal quarters of Kichaka and left the wing jug at the doorstep. She then hurriedly tried to get away from the place, but Kichaka chased her, and trembling like a leaf, Draupadi fled to the court of Virata, fell at the feet of Yudhishthira, who was in the midst of a game with the king, and begged him to come to her rescue. By that time, Kichaka reached the court and kicked her in the presence of all. Though Yudhishthira was pained to see this, he did not utter a single word, for he could not possibly reveal his relation with